So, Sarah Ainslee, welcome to the Between You and Me podcast.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be here. This is so much fun.
I am so excited. We've been internet friends, but also real friends for years now. We've actually met each other, which
Yes.
feels like a big deal.
And I feel like we have one of those really weird friendships too, where it's like we kind of know how we connected, but we also don't know how we connected. And I feel like those are the best internet friendships to have.
Yeah. It's either that or freaky stalker, and we're not either of that. And I just took this into really awkward territory straight away, so you can only go up from here.
Exactly. There's only room to grow.
Exactly. We're doing great. So I am, one, so excited to have you on today because, well, you're my friend, but also you have an amazing knowledge and lived experience in so many facets. I would say, like, as a single woman of faith in America, as someone, as a journalist, as a writer in Christian music, and as an author. You have wild stories to share, both fictional and non-fiction, and it always blows my mind. And so I'm really excited for people today to meet you and hear all about your upcoming book that wasn't in the script, which I think when this releases, it's like a day or two before, so it's out April 1, right?
April 4th. April 4th.
Let's cut that. So it's out April 4th, everybody.
Yes. You were close. It's fine. 3 days. Well, you know what? Technically, if we're looking at the time difference between Australia and America, you're not that far off.
Just a couple of days. Thank you. You're very gracious. Yeah, that's great. So, for starters, we're going to get into all of that. But for new friends of the podcast and people who haven't befriended you on the internet, who is Sarah Ainslee?
Sarah Ainslee, well, as my social handle says, Sarah Ainslee is a writer, or Sarah is a writer. I've been writing my whole life. I don't know. It was just something. I was never that kid in school who was good at math or like history or anything. I was always really good at writing. And like one of my earliest memories was my teacher giving me, like, I think if she was like gave the second grade class a writing assignment, and it was like, write a 2-page like little essay on just like your dream best day ever. And mine was like 6 pages. And I handed it into like the room mom who was grading it. And she was all like, Sarah, this is really excessive. It's really good, but it's really excessive. And I think that was like the seed of like, okay, maybe this is my future here.
Yes, that is so good. So whereabouts do you live right now?
I'm over in Nashville, Tennessee. I've been here for almost, 9 years, which is kind of wild.
Yeah.
I'm originally from Southern California, so big jump when I moved out here.
Big jump. And you currently are experiencing the weird Nashville boom, even in COVID, and everything that goes with that. There's a lot there. So one, you're still here and alive, and in Nashville thriving, I would say. I would say you're thriving, just to be clear.
I was,
mad respect
for the most part, still here. Yes.
Yes. I just realized I said mad respect, and I'm like, who am I? Anyway, we're doing great here. But I want to know, tell me your story. And I know that's a loaded question, but tell me how you got to this point where you are about to become a published author. We are about the same age. That is a huge achievement. But tell me how you got to this point where you are living in Nashville, you are writing books, you're nannying, and randomly spent some time in Christian music. How did this all happen?
Well, I mean, I guess the short version of the story would be, I mean, I kind of have COVID to blame for this. I've always been kind of a creative, I don't know. As a teenager, I wrote fan fiction, but I feel like every teenager wrote fan fiction, so it's not a big deal. But like, I also just wrote very creatively, and that was initially my start writing. A lot of people think, oh, you just did journalism, you did this and that. I'm like, no, I actually started writing like just mock novels and notebooks when I was like 13 years old. And it was something, when I started doing journalism, it was something that very much got put to the back burner. I was very focused on, blogging. I was very focused on doing all that stuff. And so it was always like writing creatively was always very dormant. Like it was there, but it was just very dormant. And then for years and years and years, I've had these ideas for stories. I read YA. I love reading YA. I don't know, maybe it's the 16-year-old in me who never grew up. but it's my favorite genre to read. So I'm like, if I ever were to write, I think I would want to write YA. And I have all these like concepts for stories popping into my head all the time, but I'm thinking, I'll never be able to do that. I don't know how, honestly. And then COVID hit. And like you said, I'm a nanny. And so I was still sort of working right around the time COVID hit, but it was also very much like, more so, we just need you for a couple of hours during the week because, I mean, the family I work for, the parents weren't working. So it was a lot of time off, a lot of walking around the neighborhood, a lot of not knowing what to do with myself. And as I'm doing a lot of reading, I'm thinking to myself, well, why aren't I just writing these stories that I've never had the time to write before, or at least giving myself a shot, seeing if I can. And so I sat down one day, and the idea for, I say it's the skeleton of that wasn't in the script was born, because the story itself was actually very wildly different. But I spent, I think, 2 or 3 months from start to finish writing this story. And then I had to like Google, like, how do you get a story published? Because that's just how like fresh I was. I didn't know what to do at that point. I'd written it. I'd gone through and edited a couple of times, which wasn't good, by the way, but it was done. And I finally like, okay, so apparently you do this thing called querying. And when you query, you have to send it to agents or you have to send it to publishers to see if they want it. And me just being like, this just sounds so easy. It'll get picked up right away. It took 3 years to get to this point and several major rewrites. So it's not easy, but I pitched it again for about 2 years, rewrote it several times in between, and eventually I ended up sending it on a whim to my publisher in like last year, like February-ish. And at this point, I feel like I'd exhausted my options with the story. I'd sent it to as many people as I could. I kept hearing no, and I was just really frustrated. And I'm like, if I don't get a yes on this from this one publisher, I'm going to shelve it. I'm just going to put it away and I'll start working on other things. And then lo and behold, like 4 weeks later, literal emails saying, hi, we want to publish this. Here's your contract. And I'm like, is this a joke? And it was, that's the point how we got here with it. It's amazing.
Yeah, that is so cool. So I've been watching you at work on this because your Instagram stories are a delight. And I've been tracking this, and when you like have quotes out of context and all sorts of things, I can't wait for the next book either because there's just so much here. But I would love to know, well, for people who haven't read the book, because I've been fortunate enough to get like an advanced reader copy, so I know how fun the book is and what it's about. It's based in New York City and has sort of elements of celebrity culture and everydayness, and I don't know, the awkwardness that comes with being a strong female that's also just perpetually awkward.
Yes.
So can you tell us about, like, that wasn't in the script? I know it's sort of like a loosely based on the Roman holiday, but I would love for people to know, like, what are they reading when they get to this?
So like I said, it's young adult. So YA is kind of like the little abbreviation for young adult, but it's a young adult romance, rom-com, I guess. And like you said, it's basically a retelling of Roman Holiday, which if anyone has ever seen that, first of all, like, drop everything you're doing, go watch Roman Holiday. It's one of the greatest romantic comedies ever. And basically the premise of that story is a princess falls asleep in the middle of Rome one night. She gets picked up by a journalist who has no idea that she's a princess. And then the next morning he wakes up, finds out who she is. And it's, well, if I just keep her with me all day, maybe I can exploit her story. And then, of course, they end up falling in love, and you can just kind of imagine what happens from there. There's chaos all over Rome with the two of them. So my story is, again, very loosely based on that. I took the concept and gender bent it. So it's a famous actor who falls asleep in a diner where our main character, Josie, is working. And she finds him and just thinking, oh, well, he goes to my school, and, I feel really bad. I think I need to take him home with me. I don't want to leave him here. I don't want to, like, call the cops on him. I think this is just the right thing to do. Takes him home, finds out who she is, gets the idea with one of her coworkers to say, well, what if we, again, spent the day with him and we decided to kind of dig up some dirt on him because he has a recent history of events going wrong, and be like, well, what if we just found out more about him? And now she spends the day with him and he spends the day with her, because it's dual POV. That's worth mentioning too. So you get his side of the story and hers. She finds out, okay, maybe he's not that bad, and maybe I'm actually really starting to like him, and there's a lot of guilt coming along with wanting to do this, and just they basically spend 24 hours, a little over 24 hours together, and all the adventures that follow and all the feelings that develop between the two of them.
Yes, and I know that you love New York City, and this book is based
Yes.
in New York. You've
Mm-hmm.
gone to New York multiple times as research for this, and I could tell because the amount of detail and your love for the city really comes through the page. Why New York? I mean, aside from the fact that you've traveled there and you love it, what was it that was like this is the place where it has to happen?
It's funny. I wish there was a reason because, like I said, when I first started this story, I very loosely set the story in New York. There was no reason for it. I think it was just because, like, before COVID hit, it was like the last place I'd gone to visit. So I just kind of wanted to insert it into the story. And it was more of like New York wasn't really part of the story. That was just kind of where the story was taking place. So when I knew when I rewrote it into that wasn't in the script, because obviously Roman Holiday, Rome is basically a character in that movie, I needed to make New York a character. So that was one of the things I did. 2021, vaccinated, feeling a little more comfortable going out into the world. I'm like, I'm going to go to New York and I'm going to try to just location scout and basically do what Josie and Rowan did and spend, 2 days in the city doing as much as I can. What would I want these characters to do? Where would they go? And that's kind of how, I don't know, at that point, just being in New York made sense because I'm like, we need to have a big city. We need to have a city where they can run around and just kind of do things and constantly be busy.
Yeah, no, I love that. So I've been to New York a couple of times, but I've never. Oh no, not really. I haven't spent time with a local. My cousin lived there for a short time. We sort of spent some time in Manhattan, and I loved it.
Mhm.
But I've never explored, like, gone further out. I've done all the touristy things, and reading your book
Mhm.
made me want to go. Oh man, I need to go to a subway and go here and eat one of those bagels and do this and this. And it was now I'm like, I need to go back. I need to go back with you and try and do all these things because it looks so fun.
Well, it's funny. Okay, so here's a very fun story. So the bagel shop in the initial like manuscript that I wrote was real. There was a real rainbow bagel store called like clever name, the Bagel Store. And like that's basically what the store in the book is based on. And I was really, really happy because I'm like, I want to point customers their way. It's the coolest bagel store I've ever seen. And as we're going through to publish the book, I read an article saying that the bagel store shut down for tax evasion. So I'm like, well, that's not good. So basically, the bagel store in the book has become Mystic Dough. And I'm like, I'm avoiding that at all costs. There are still rainbow bagel stores in New York, just not the one that was in the book, unfortunately. There's a fun fact. I know. I was just like, well, that stinks.
Of all bagel stores, that one. Oh,
that
that's
one.
fun.
That one.
Yes, it made me want to go back to New York so bad. It was great. So there are so many elements of celebrity culture in your book, which made me
Mhm.
laugh and cringe. And I would love to know a bit more about your backgrounds in the distant past in Christian music, and actually how your time, largely on tour, quote unquote, wrangling bands,
Mhm.
influenced the way that you portrayed the character of Rowan and the celebrity culture that he lives in.
Well, it's really, really funny. A lot of people don't know this about me, but when I was a kid living in Los Angeles, I did background acting as well. So a lot of, yeah, it's very fun. I did it for a year. It was never anything I took too seriously. I took acting classes, which I think my mother still regrets paying for to this day because I never used them. But I took acting classes and was on sets, and I was able to see how people kind of interacted with one another and how actors were and how management was because you just see so much. Even though I was a kid, you see so much. And so I always kind of just tucked that away and kept that with me. And then going on tours, you said, seeing a different side of the entertainment industry because it was very separate, but it was also very similar in the way things operate. There's the management side, which isn't always as friendly as you think it's going to be. It's very domineering at times. And I don't know, I wanted to infuse a lot of what I saw there into this. And then, especially the manuscript I'm currently writing, there's a lot. It's basically very music heavy. So it's a lot of bringing up a lot of what was like being on tour, working in Christian music. This is what I saw bands doing. This is what I saw management doing. Some of it good, some of it bad, but it's just how it's translating to these characters.
Yeah. Can you tell me how you managed to spend time on the roads as a, and I know that you did serious important journalism in music
Mm-hmm.
for a long time, and it's hard to get a paid gig doing that in Christian music.
Yeah.
So I'm, and it means that part of it is that this book is being published, which is amazing. But how did you get to a place where you were interested enough in Christian music to actually want to go on the road, write, do all those things?
I feel it's one of those things I wish I had an answer for it, but it just feels like a lot of dumb luck. I know for me, like I was just so into Christian music as a teenager. I was like frequenting like Jesus Freak Hideout, like that was like my primo website. And you
Same.
like,
Yes.
yes, so
Yep.
like you love it so much, and then I'm just like, you read the articles and you read the reviews, and you just kind of think to yourself, well, I could do that. Why can't I do that? And so at the time, the website was New Release Tuesday. And as a teenager, I think I was just out of high school, set up a profile, and I started writing all these album reviews for albums that I really loved. And at the time, the site was fan run, which I think was why I felt comfortable going in to do that. It was very much kind of like a MySpace layout where you could kind of like, choose songs for upload pictures and have a blog. Like it was kind of just how the site was run. It's very different now, but that's how it was back then. And I posted all these reviews. And this is back when the site was still really, really small. So the founder of the site would kind of just go in and read things periodically. And apparently he was on the day that I joined and uploaded all these album reviews, sent me a message right away being like, hey, do you want to be a staff contributor because you're a really good writer? And I'm like, well, first of all, this is a lot. I joined the site 3 hours ago. but
Yeah.
And it kind of just grew from there. I would post, like, I was what they called like a staff volunteer reviewer. So they would send me albums and be like, okay, you're going to review this. And then over time, they're like, oh, we realize you like to write blogs and you just basically like to share about your life online. Would you be curious in doing like series for us writing about things like this? And again, it just kind of snowballed from there to the point where the opportunity came up for them to go on their first tour in 2012. And they knew and this was like back in the days of vlogging, back in the days we know all that was huge. And they're like, well, we're going to need someone to go out if we're going to be part of this tour and run the booth. Would you be interested in doing that and possibly running some sort of tour vlog? We'll pay for everything. And I'm like, yeah, I'll do that for like, it's amazing. And the experience was very hard. It was one of the first times I'd been away from home. So that was like, I think the traumatic part of it for me, and just kind of being immersed in the reality of Christian music in both the good and the bad. And like, because you kind of see it with rose colored glasses when you're on the outside, and then you're in it and you're like, okay, this is a little bit different than I was expecting. Still, I mean, there's a lot of good, but there's a lot of bad. But it wasn't enough to turn me off from it, because I just remember being on that first tour and coming home not depressed or defeated, but just thinking, I want to do this again and I want to be able to come back a little bit better. And so it was another case where a year later, another tour opportunity came up. They said, do you want to do it? And it just, again, a lot of dumb luck. Every single time a tour opportunity would come up, they'd be like, hey, do you want to do this? And I was very, very fortunate. It was a ride.
Fortunate, but also you worked really hard.
Fair.
I'm like, if I can say that, you worked really hard. You're an excellent writer, and
Thank you.
I've done a little bit, quote unquote, work at festivals, but never been on tour. That is hardcore.
Yeah,
that's hardcore. And I would also anticipate that being a young female would put you in quite a vulnerable position. In that, especially being your first or second time on tour, like it makes me think of like the first time I decided I wanted to travel overseas without really understanding what that was. And I was just like, okay, yes. I'm in Los Angeles now with no one else. What do I do?
Culture shock.
Yeah, except you had a bunch of really powerful, wealthy people around you, and you had something to run and deadlines to meet. There's a lot there. How did your time in Christian music, did it challenge your faith or shape your faith in any way? Or is it always very separate from your faith?
It definitely did. I mean, It challenged it in, first of all, the good aspect, because I grew up in a very legalistic church culture where it was kind of like you do this, that, and the other, or else you're going to hell. That's just very much how it was. And so you enter the Christian music world and you meet people who are lukewarm, or you meet people who are very hardcore, or you meet people who just are living their life and trying to be like Jesus the best they can. And you're like, I don't know who is right here. I don't know if I'm right. I don't know if they're right. I don't know what's going on. And it was a very, I don't know, in a very odd way, I was able to find myself and kind of rewrite my faith to an extent, because it's like, okay, I'm not going to be the person I was coming home. I don't know if that's possible with everything I've seen and everything I've experienced, but I also don't want to be like some of these more powerful entities that I'm working with, where you just don't feel comfortable and you don't know if they truly believe what they're saying they believe. And I'm like, I know I'm somewhere in the middle, but I'm also not one of the two polar opposites. So in a way it did. I don't know. I came home, especially from that first tour, I came home questioning a lot, because it was, I mean, the experience was just very bizarre. It was a lot of the extremity of one side of it was extreme. The other side of it was a very polar opposite extreme. So I came home questioning a lot and being like, okay, would I still even really want to do this? Do I kind of just want to stay safe in my bubble and just write my reviews and just kind of be happy here? But I'm glad I kept doing it. And in a way, I felt like every single time I did it, my faith was rewritten to be healthier in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, did your time on the road impact, trying to figure out how I phrase this, did it impact your relationship with the city of Nashville? Knowing that Nashville is essentially now a Christian music city. Everyone comes there.
Mm-hmm.
It's very weird. Um, what does and you still live there now, but I know you're not in the music
Mm-hmm.
industry. So what does it did that change the way that you looked at the city, knowing that so many of the people you encounter are either based there, spend time there, or source their power and their wealth from spending time in Nashville?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I remember again when I was a teenager just browsing these websites, seeing that everyone was in Nashville. And so you're thinking, this is the golden standard. When I grow up, I need to move to Nashville if I'm going to be, doing this seriously and pursuing it seriously. And like the first time I was out here, I felt that. I'm like, I'm going to be here. I'm going to do this. This is going to be great. I'm going to live here and I'm going to pursue this seriously. And I spent maybe 2 or 3 years living out here while still pursuing Christian music and pursuing journalism. And at the very start, it was just like being starstruck all the time. You would go to Frothy Monkey and see, like, I don't know, you would see someone who works for Jeremy Camp, and you're just like, I know who they are. I'm freaking out. This is so cool. And then over time, you start to realize you kind of, it's interesting because you kind of have that, I need to be professional in a sense. And so, in a way, you kind of have to kill that fan in yourself.
Yes.
And it's very, very bizarre, because you want to be the fan and you don't want to become that jaded person. But on the other hand, too, you just kind of have to have that stoic demeanor of, this is my job. I have to be serious. And then over time, I feel like it kind of loses its sheen anyway. But you kind of get to the point, too, where you're like, does the stoicness really even matter? You know?
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting balance, especially when you first move here. It's such an interesting balance.
Yes, I relate to that very much. So yeah, even there's some of the interviews I do now are very normal, but there are some people that I'm like, Jessica, be professional, hold it in, like do not
take it down.
And but it always breaks out, especially right at the end. You can always tell right at the end. I'm just like, oh yeah, just talk to them, and it just. Yeah, it's that weird thing of being like, I'm a professional, treat me like a professional, but also, do you know that your music changed my life? Like, how do I? And it's that awkwardness of it being like, you're also just a human. It's so strange. Yeah,
it really is, because again, it's like you want to be their biggest fan, but you also feel weird being their biggest fan, and you're just like, where do I fall in between?
Yes. In the character of Rowan in your book, you managed to depict him as he's really likable, but he's also so imperfect. And I thought it was really clever that the way that you wrote him, purely because at the start I was like, is this a guy that I really like? Is he good enough for Josie? What's he like? What's his deal? Is he a bit of a punk? and yet you sort of bring this likability to him, but he's not a cliche romantic lead either. He's got a fair bit of like attitude and conviction, which is great. When you were writing him and you were bringing in elements of the best and worst of celebrity culture that you've seen, what were the trademarks that you wanted Rowan to have that would mark him as, well, someone who is, I guess, an imperfect human, but also likable? Because you would have seen imperfect humans who are both likable and unlikable on the road. So what is it that sort of formed Rowan?
It's funny, like the way I've been describing it is I feel like Josie is how I think. That's like her headspace is my headspace. Like I'm constantly overthinking things. I'm extremely awkward, but my attitude is very much Rowan. I'm like, I will go for it. I will get out of everyone's way. Like I want this now. Like I can be very impulsive at times. So it's funny. I feel like a lot of Rowan came, at least some of his behaviors came from me in a sense, in how impulsive I can be, because especially when you're out on the road and you're touring and you're part of the entertainment industry, when I first got into it, I was fully a Josie. I was very reserved. I was very quiet. I'm like, to an extent, letting people walk all over you because you just feel like that's the polite thing to do. And then you kind of get on your third tour and you're like, I need to have a bit of a backbone here. I need to be able to stand up for myself and say, I don't like this. And you feel like a horrible person, but it also doesn't make you a horrible person. You kind of learn where to use it and where not to, which is, I feel like that's where Rowan very much is in the book. He's learning where to use his celebrity and where to use it for good. And it's hard when you're 17 years old and your feelings are everywhere. And I think that's part of what contributes to him being so imperfect. At the end of the day, he really is just a kid.
Yeah, absolutely. That was so good. I love that. Thank you. That was answered so well.
Thank you.
Doing great. Now, I have a few random popcorn questions for you, but before I dive into them, have I missed anything, or is there anything that you wanted to say or talk about with your book?
No, I think you're doing a really good job. This is so much fun.
You're doing a great job too.
Thank you.
We will 100% obviously promo the book, make sure that we have links for everyone to go to it. These are random popcorn questions, maybe slightly adjacent, but they're just random and I'm curious. So we'll see what happens. Normally, if it's like a musician, I'm like, if you have a fan, they come up to you on the street and they'll say this. And I'm like, well, technically, people could still do that with you because your face is on the cover of the back of your book. So
that's true.
This could happen. Okay, my first popcorn question for you is, what is your weirdest tour memory that you can share publicly?
Oh my goodness. So there are several. Okay, there's one that comes to mind immediately, and the reason I say this is because I'm integrating it into the book I'm currently writing, so I feel like it's kind of fair game at this point. I'm putting it out there. I will not say the name of the band out of respect for everybody, but there was one incident where I was on tour, and this was maybe middle March, and we were driving through Colorado, and there was like a massive snowstorm that had hit the night before. We were on our way to a show, and I don't remember where we were. I just remember that there was snow all over the road and that the roads were iced over. It did not feel safe to drive. And we were all looking at each other being like, we think we're going to have to cancel the show tonight because we've been stuck on this highway for hours and we have no idea how we're going to get there. And as this is happening, one of the band members gets sick. And like, we don't know why. We just know that they came down with like a stomach virus. And we're all just like, first of all, panicking because we're in close quarters together. And we're like, great, we don't want to catch it. But for anyone who's never been on a tour bus, there are certain things to keep this PG you cannot do with the toilet. Basically, you have to keep it reserved to number one. So obviously he's sick. So he's having to get sick off the bus. So he's like running off the bus every 15 minutes to get sick. And at one point he's out there and the bus starts moving because we finally start moving. And so here's this poor guy just getting sick off the side of the road, trying to run back onto the bus as we're moving down the highway. Not very fast, mind you, but we're moving. And it was chaos. We're all like looking out the window. We're like, is he going to make it? Are we going to run him over? Is this going to be okay? Are we going to make it to the show on time? It was chaos. Absolute chaos.
Wow. So did he eventually like run up beside it and like jump in, or did
Oh yeah,
did
oh
the
yeah,
tour van?
oh yeah. We had to
Yeah.
fling the door open, and then we had to be like, hurry up and jump inside. It was chaos.
Well done.
And he
Yeah,
made it,
that
by
is
the
awesome.
way.
Yeah. How many people normally are in a tour bus at a time?
It
Like, how
depends.
many people sleep in there?
It depends on the size of the tour, or if there's a crew bus or things like that.
Mhm.
Typically, at least the tours I was a part of, they sleep about 10 to 12, depending on the size of the bus, the make and model of the bus, which is it's a lot of
Oh
people.
man.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I mean, depend again, it really depends like who's on the road that week. Like, or is the crew going to be with you? Is the crew going to be in their own bus? Because I did a
Yeah.
couple of bigger tours too, where the crew just had their own bus, which was always kind of nice. We had a little more space, or
Yeah.
just just different reasons. But for the most part, I want to say there was at least at all times 8 people.
Yeah. You would get to know people really, really well.
Oh
It would
yeah.
just, yeah, just no way around it. Now I know that you are, when I say like a huge superheroes fan, that's like the understatement of the century.
A little
You
bit.
know superheroes like no one else. I have a question for you.
Okay.
In a fight, would Captain America or Wanda, as in the Scarlet Witch, win if those two had to face each other?
That's so hard. Well, okay, obviously strength is going to Captain America. I feel like strength he has hands down. Like if we're talking hand to hand combat, like he has it down pat. Wanda though can manipulate reality, and I feel like that's a bit unfair because at
Yeah,
that
that's
point she
true.
can just manipulate. She can kind of manipulate herself to be stronger than him. So I feel like I kind of have to give it to her, just in the sense of
Yeah.
her brain, I guess, works bigger than his.
Yeah, that's true. She could create an entire town. Yep,
Yeah.
that works. That makes sense. Yeah, Captain America is my favorite, but I'm like, no, you're
Yes.
not wrong there. That's good. Yeah, absolutely.
I know
Have you
it's hard.
seen the
That's
latest?
hard.
Have you seen the
I
latest
have.
Ant-Man movie yet?
Yes,
Thoughts?
I have a lot of thoughts on it. I didn't love it. I mean, honestly, that's kind of my first takeaway from it. I didn't love it. I think I liked the smaller scale of the first two Ant-Man movies a lot more. I loved the family dynamic. And you could tell they definitely tried to go for that here. Like you could tell they were trying to bring the whole family thing together. It just didn't feel the same.
Yeah, I haven't seen it yet, but I've heard that it's like not as good. So I'm just like
I mean,
tempering
it
my
has
expectations.
it had, yes, temper your expectations. It has high points to it, but if you really liked the first two, then I can see you going into this one and being like, it wasn't as good.
Yeah, I hear that, especially after Wakanda Forever. Sort of like everything after that, just like eh.
I know. I was gonna say they set that bar so high. It's all like I felt bad for any movie that was going to follow Wakanda Forever.
Right? I know, and it was amazing even without Chadwick Boseman in it. I was like, oh, here we are. Anyway, I digress. My last question for you: if you could go back, let's see, to the day before you left and moved to Nashville, what
Mm-hmm.
would you say to yourself, knowing what you know now?
Ooh, that's a loaded question. I don't know. I think have grace for yourself, I think is the thing I would tell myself. Because I know one of the things when I first moved here that I struggled with a lot. And I feel like at that point, I lied about it and said I didn't. I was very envious. And I was very like, well, why does this person have what I want so deeply? Why does this person have this and this person have this? I feel like I'm failing. And to a certain extent, I still feel that way. Like I kind of feel it in different ways now because now as an author, you kind of look at other authors who are doing things and you're like, well, why aren't I good enough to do that? But I mean, it was just I was 22, 23 when I first moved out here. So obviously it was just very amplified and and especially being in the Nashville bubble where it's like very, if you're not here, you're here. That's just kind
Yeah,
of how it is. You're like, what am I doing wrong? Why am I like this? Am I failing at life? And the thing I would tell myself is just have grace for yourself. You're going to figure yourself out. Just be proud of what you're doing and how you're getting there because it's not easy.